Hi, third grade. Today we're going to be working on lesson 11. I can't believe we're that far along already. This is Miss Tragi. Let's get started. Here's our overview for today. Our focusing question is still, what challenges do immigrants face in a new country? Our content framing question is distill. What is the central message of Tea with Milk? And finally, our craft question is, how do I listen for key words? To get us started today, I want you to think. Think about which strategies might help you determine the central idea of our text. Try to recall ways we've discovered a central idea or a central message before. What strategies can we use? Some strategies you might have thought of to help us figure out the central idea or central message might be to notice repeated ideas in language. In our story, we noticed the phrase tea with milk is repeated a lot. You might have also noticed the beginning and the end of the story. We can think about how at the beginning, Misako's a little girl in San Francisco, but at the end, she's an adult in Japan. You might also think that we can notice how characters change. By analyzing how our character is acting throughout the story, it helps us get an idea of the central idea or central message of the text. So we're going to start by thinking about repetition in our story. So first think about, why is it important to listen for key words? You might recall that key words identify ideas that are important to an author or speaker, or that key words sometimes help us identify a central message in a text. Now I also want you to think, what are some ways you can recognize key words? Well, noticing repetition can help me find key words. Because when an author repeats something, we know that that's key or something important they want us to think about. And we know that listening to changes in a speaker's or reader's voice can help notice key words. Sometimes speakers or readers change their pace or volume when they read different key words. Now we're going to be on the lookout for some repetition. So please follow along as I read this part from page 4. From the window in her room, the girl could see the city of San Francisco. She imagined that it was a city of many palaces, and one day her father would take her there, he had promised, riding on a paddle steamer across the shining bay. Her parents called her Ma Chang, which was short for Misako, and spoke to her in Japanese. Everyone else called her May and talked with her in English. At home, she had rice and miso soup and plain green tea for breakfast. At her friends' houses, she ate pancakes and muffins and drank tea with milk and sugar. Now that we reread that page from our story, what words did you identify as key words in that reading? Maybe you said Ma Chang, May, Japanese, English, home, friends' homes, or tea with milk and sugar. Now, why did you identify these words as being key? Well, maybe you heard the reader's voice stress these words, so they caught your attention. Or maybe you realized that the title of the story, Tea with Milk, is part of the phrase, tea with milk and sugar, so it might be key. And last question, how might these key words relate to a central message in the story? You might think that these words show how Misako has two cultures. At home she's Japanese, but outside of her house she's American. You might also think that these words help you understand that from the time Misako was a little girl, she had to figure out how to be both Japanese and American. Now you might recall that the phrase tea with milk and sugar appears frequently in our text. So let's look at what pages it always shows up on. We can find that phrase on page 4, the one we just read, where it talks about her being at a friend's house as she ate pancakes and muffins and drank tea with milk and sugar. You might think that this sentence is important because it shows the difference of what Misako does at home and what is an American tradition. Now, we can also see this same phrase on page 10, when Misako says, "And I like my tea with milk and sugar." This kind of lets us know that Misako is unhappy learning Japanese traditions and is angry that she has to give up her American ones. On page 26, we see the same phrase again when it says, "Did you always drink tea with milk and sugar?" This shows us that Misako is happy because she met someone who shares her traditions. And finally, we see the phrase again on page 32 when the story says, "All of this happened a long time ago, but even today, I always drink tea with milk and sugar." And this sentence is important because it shows us that Misako passed on to her son her tradition of drinking milk with tea. Now that we've recognized how frequently the phrase tea with milk and sugar comes up in our story, in what way is that phrase, tea with milk and sugar, a symbol in our story? And what is it a symbol of? Well, before we can answer that, let's make sure we understand what a symbol is. A symbol is an object or picture that represents a person, place, thing, or idea. So, let's think about how is that phrase a symbol in our story, and what is it a symbol of? Well, you might say that tea with milk and sugar just represents Misako's American life. You might also say that it represents her desire to follow American traditions. Both of those answers are correct, and other ways as well that you might have formed your answer. So now that we've reviewed some repeated phrases and lines in our story, it's time for you to think about what the central message of tea with milk is. So before you do that, let's remember that to find the central message, think, what does this story teach us about how we connect with the world around us? And a helpful hint that I want to give to you before you start is that line we talked about, tea with milk and sugar, it's a symbol that connects to the central message. So recall that last slide, and it has something to do with our central message. I hope that now you start to have an idea about what you think the central message is. Recall how we analyzed a repeated phrase, and I gave you that hint that line is a symbol that's going to connect to our central message. So now you're going to tell me what you think the central message is by completing the sentence frames in handout 11A. So make sure when you go to do handout 11A, you click on the box with the arrow through it in the top right-hand corner to take you into Google Docs. Then you can type your answers or speak them directly into your document. Make sure you turn in your work when you're finished. Awesome job completing that form. Here's an example of what you might have said. A central message in Tea with Milk is that you don't have to give up one culture to live in another, and that the symbol of drinking tea with milk supports this central message because Misako drinks tea with milk even when she lives in Japan. Or you might have said something similar to these next two sentence frames. A central message in Tea with Milk is that you can make your home anywhere, or that the symbol of drinking tea with milk supports this central message because even though Misako ends up staying in Japan, she makes herself feel at home by drinking her tea with milk in her new home country. I'm really excited to see what you guys wrote down as your responses. And if they're not identical to this, don't feel like you need to go change anything, as long as you tried your hardest to recall what the central message of our story is. Your answers, I'm sure, will be great. Now we're already into our deep dive for today. Today's deep dive is how can we examine dialogue and punctuation within dialogue. So first, let's start by recalling some things we've learned before. What is dialogue? Well, dialogue are the exact words a character says. Then what's a quick way to notice dialogue? Well, through quotation marks, of course. And finally, why would an author include dialogue in a story? Well, they might include it to show what the characters say, to show characters speaking to each other, and it helps a reader understand the character's thoughts and emotions. Now, so we can begin practicing examining dialogue and punctuation within dialogue, I want you to read out loud page 22 with me. Let's begin. "Can I be of any help?" Misako asked from behind the crowd. "You sound like an American," a little boy said. "And you sound like an Englishman," Misako said. "Thank goodness," the Englishwoman said. "Tell us where you keep your hot water bottles and umbrellas." "And handkerchiefs," the man added. Misako told them, and as the smiling English family left, the supervisor said to her, "I have a new job for you." So now I want you to think, what did you notice about the dialogue and punctuation in this passage as you just read it out loud with me? Here are some of the things I hope you noticed. I hope you saw that the words the character says go inside a set of quotation marks, or that to start with a capital letter and end with a punctuation mark. Might have also noticed that the only difference between words that are in dialogue and not in dialogue is that the spoken words are inside of quotation marks. Here's a really important one I hope you notice, that every time a different character speaks, his or her words go in a new paragraph. So on page 22, that part we just read, the only way to tell when Misako, the English boy, the English woman are speaking is because of the change in paragraphs. And some other things you might have noticed are that some dialogue sentences include words that aren't part of the dialogue, like this one. "And handkerchiefs," the man added. In that sentence, you see quotation marks go around the speaker's words, and a comma goes inside of the quotation marks. So a comma is also a part of showing where the speaker's words end. And also that a punctuation mark goes inside the ending quotation mark. The fact that punctuation goes inside of a quotation mark is something that's going to help you on your exit ticket later. So make a note of that. Now I just want to recap some of the new things we've learned today and have already known from before. The first thing is that repetition can help us find the central message of a story. We also learned that a symbol is an object or picture that represents a person, place, thing, or idea. We also solidified the fact that the central message of Tea with Milk is that tea with milk shows that you can make your home anywhere and be happy. And finally, some new information we learned about dialogue was that dialogue is always put in quotation marks and is accompanied by punctuation, and that a new paragraph starts each time a new character speaks. Now you're finished, third grade. Awesome job again, like always. Be sure to click out of this, find your classwork, and make sure you take that exit ticket. And if your hour is incomplete, please study your spelling words, your vocabulary, or do the fluency that's on the last slide. Keep up the good work and keep reading. See you later, third grade.